Welcome back, coders. In this video, we will be discussing the question longest consecutive sequence of elements. So let's understand the question. So you will be given an array of elements. So for example, this is the array that you have been given and you have to print the longest consecutive sequence, right? So let's start by discussing by all the sequence. What are the sequence? One, it will start from 1, 2, and 3 because 4 is not here. Then we'll start from 5, 6, 7 is not here. We start from 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. And then we have 15 alone. So these are all the possible sequences of consecutive elements and we have to print the longest one. So we have to give this as our answer. So, and also you have to do it on the complexity of ON. So try to do it on yourself and then we will discuss the solution of this video. I hope you tried it yourself. So let's discuss the solution. How we'll do that is, so we have been given this array. First of all, we will create a hash map containing an integer value and a boolean value. Okay. So we will start a for loop for all. We'll traverse through this array and we will give true to all these elements. Okay, so for every element we'll just add true in it. True means this boolean value represents that whether the sequence can start from this value or not. So this true will represent that yes, it can be our starting point. And if the boolean value is false, then it cannot be our starting point. So in the beginning, what we are doing is we are putting true in every element with all the elements of the array. So we are putting true with all the elements and then we'll check which elements can be our starting point. So we put true with every element, right? Now we check, we start another for loop and we check whether this element can be our starting point. So what we do is we check whether one previous element, that is if 9 is present in this array, then 10, we cannot start our sequence with 10, we have to start our sequence with 9. So we check whether value -1 is present in our hash map or not, right? So we check for 10, we check whether 9 is present here or not. So we get 9. So we just make this false. For 5, we check for 4. 4 is not here. So we'll keep it as present. For 9, we check for 8. 8 we get 8. So we just make it false. So what we are doing is we are making them false, that these values cannot be our starting point because their previous element is already present in the, okay, for 1 we check for 0. 0 is not present, so we keep it true. For 11 we check for 10, so we found 10, so we just make it false. For 8 we check for 7, we don't find 7, so we keep it true. For 6 we check for 5, we get 5, we make it false. For 15 we don't have 14, so we keep it true. For 3 we check for 2, we get 2, make it false. For 12 we check for 11, we get 11, make this false. For 2 we check for 1 and we get 1, so we make it false. So now we get these 4 values and only these values can be our starting point. As you can see in our sequences that we created, only these 4 values are our starting point, right? So only these 4 values can be our starting point, which are false, which are true, sorry. So now what we do is we just start a for loop and we just check for these values. We put the condition whether our value is true. If our value is true, then only we check for them. So for 10 it is false, so we don't do the work here. For 5 it is true, So we start we make 5 our temporary starting point. We start a variable of temporary length and we check whether temporary starting point plus temporary length is present in this hash map or not. So we check for whether 6 is there or not. So 6 is there, we get 6. So what we do is we just increase our temporary length. So our temporary length becomes 2. So then we check for 5 plus 2. That means we check for 7. But 7 is not there. Right? We cannot find 7 here. So we return, we get our TSP as 5 and TL as 2. Right? So I'll just write it like this. So we have TSP and TL. For the first sequence, we get TSP as 5 and TL as 2. And we also initialize our maximum starting point and maximum length because we have to find our longest consecutive sequence. So if we initialize this by 0, then what we do is we just compare our maximum length with our temporary length. If our temporary length is greater than our maximum length, then we just change our maximum length with temporary length and we change our maximum starting point with temporary starting point, right? So here our maximum length is 0, our temporary length is 2. So our temporary length is greater than our maximum length. So we just change our maximum starting point with our temporary starting point and we change our maximum length with temporary starting length. So this becomes 5 and 2. Now we again check for the value which has true in it. So we get 1. We make our temporary starting point as 1, make our temporary length as 1. Then we check for TSP plus TL. So we get 1 plus 1, 2. So we find 2. We get 2. We increase our temporary length as 2. We find for 3. We get 3. We increase our temporary length as 3. We check for 4. We don't find 4. So we get temporary starting point as 1 and temporary length as 3. Then we compare our temporary length with maximum length and our temporary length is greater. So we just change these. Change our temporary starting point by we change our maximum starting point by temporary starting point and maximum length by temporary length. Now again we check for the next value which has true in it. So we get 8. We make our temporary starting point 8, we make our temporary length 1. Now we check for 9. We get 9, we increase our temporary length. We check for 10, we get 10, we increase our temporary length. We check for 11, we get 11, we increase our temporary length. Then we check for 12 because 8 plus 4 is 12. So we get 12, we just increase our temporary length. Then we check for 13, we don't have 13. So this will be our temporary starting point and temporary length. Now again, we check whether our temporary length is greater than our maximum length. So yes, it is greater. So we just change these by temporary starting point and temporary length. Again, we check for next true value and next true value is 15. So make our starting point, make our temporary starting point 15 and make our temporary length as 1. We check for 16, we don't have 16, we get this only. We check whether our temporary length is greater than our maximum length. So no. So these value won't get changed. Now what we do is we just print 8 plus I till our maximum length. I is less than maximum length. That is we print 8, 9, 10, 11 and 12. Print these 5 values because this is our longest sequence of consecutive elements. So let's try to code this. So first of all, we will take input from the user. Scanner scn is equals to new scanner system.in. Okay. system.in. Now what we do is we get the number of elements. scn.extend. Now we make an array of length n. Now fill this array, right? Int I is equals to 0, I less than n, I plus plus, and we just fill this array from user. Now what we do is we just create a hash map. Hash map containing integer values as well as Boolean values, right? Because we have to save our values with true or false so that we can know whether it is our starting point or not. So we created a hash map. Now what we do is we just start our for loop. We travel for every value in the array, and we just put in our map value with true. This is our first step. Now for a second step, we'll check whether our value minus 1 is present or not. So again we travel through whole array and we check whether our map contains key value minus 1. So if our map contains value minus 1, then what we do is we put false in front of our value. Now for third work, we start our maximum starting point as 0. We start our maximum starting point as 0. We start our maximum length as 0. Now we start our for loop for every value in the array, and what we check is we check whether our map at value will get the value whether it is true or false. So if it is true, we'll do the work. If it is not true, then we won't do the work. If it is true, we start our temporary starting point as value. We start our temporary length as 1. Now we start our while loop. While our map contains temporary starting point plus temporary length. So we just keep on increasing our temporary length until that. Otherwise, we come out of the loop and we check whether our temporary length is greater than our maximum length. If our temporary length is greater than our maximum length, then we change our maximum length by temporary length. We change our maximum starting point by temporary starting point, right? Now we come out of this loop and we just write the loop for printing our longest consecutive sequence. So we start our I from 0, we go up till maximum length, and we just print system.out.println. We just print maximum starting point plus I. So this should, let's see whether our code works. It is giving a compilation error. Okay, I missed a bracket here. Let's try to run this again. Again, I missed a bracket. Okay. Now it should run fine. Okay, it's not running fine. It's fine, small mistakes. Now it should really run fine. Yes, it is working finally. Now let's try to submit this. Small compilation errors. So you have to be very careful while writing the code. Yes, our answer is correct. Let's analyze this code, right? Let's see what we did here. So first of all, we just put value with true. Let's take this code with us and see how it's working. Wait. Just give me a minute. Let's take this code and see how it's working. Yeah, okay, so this is our code. Make it a little smaller and put it here. And we just erase all of this. Okay, so first of all, we'll put true in front of every value, right? So let's do our work here only. Let's make this a little bigger so that you can see properly what I am doing, right? So first of all, for this loop, we just put true in front of every value. So we just put true in front of all of these values, right? For this second loop, we check whether our value -1 is present in this hash map or not, right? So for 10, we check whether 10 minus 1, that is 9 is present or not. So we get 9. What we do is we just make this false. We make this false, right? Now we go and check for all of these values. So for 5, we check for 4, but 4 is not present. So we keep it true. For 9, we check for 8. We get 8. We make it false. For 1, we check for 0. We don't have 0. So we keep it true. For 11, we check for 10. We get 10. Make it false. For 8, we check for 7. So there is no 7. So we keep it true. For 6, we check for 5. We get 5. Make it false. For 15, we don't have 14. So we keep it true. For 3, we check for 2. We get 2. Make it false. For 12, we check for 11. We get 11. Make it false. For 2, we check for 1. We get 1. Make it false. Now, we have 4 true values. That is 5, 1, 8 and 15. Now we do the work here, right? So first of all, what we do, we make a MSP as 0, make a maximum length as 0. Now we start our for loop for all of the elements again. Now we only find those values which are true. That is 5, 1, 8 and 15, right? And what we do is, first of all, we check for 10. We don't have true. We don't work anything. We check for 5. Yes, we get true. We make our TSP as 5 and we make our temporary length as 1. Okay, so we made our temporary length as 1. We made our temporary starting point as 5. Now what we do is we check for temporary length plus temporary starting point, TSP plus TL. That is 5 plus 1, 6. So if 6 is present, yes, 6 is present, we just increase the temporary length. So our temporary length becomes 2. Now we again check for 5 plus 2, 7. 7 is not present. So we just come out of this loop. Now we check whether our temporary length is greater than our maximum length. So yes, so we just change our maximum starting point with temporary starting point and we change our maximum length by temporary length, right? Again we do the same thing. We again travel here. We check for 9, it is false. For 1, it is true. So we make our temporary starting point as 1. We make our temporary length as 1. We check for 1 plus 1, 2. We get 2. We increase our temporary length. Our temporary length becomes 2. We check for 1 plus 2, 3. We get 3. We increase our temporary length as 3. So now we don't have 4. So what we do is we just compare our temporary length with we compare our temporary length with maximum length, and what we get is, yes, our temporary length is greater than our maximum length. So we just change these two values. We change our maximum starting point with temporary starting point. We change our maximum length by temporary length. Now again, we go ahead. We check for 11, it's false. We check for 8. Yes, our 8 is also true. So make our temporary starting point as 8. Make our temporary length as 1. We check for 8 plus 1, 9. We get 9. We increase our temporary length. We check for 10. Yes, we increase our temporary length. We check for 11. Yes, we increase our temporary length. Check for 12. Yes, we increase our temporary length. Then we check for 13. But 13 is not present. So we again check this loop. So yes, our temporary length is greater than our maximum length. We again change these values. Our starting point becomes 8 and our maximum length becomes 5. Now we check for 6. 6 is false. We check for 15. So yes, 15 can be a starting point. So we make 15 as our temporary starting point. We make temporary length as 1. We check for 16. We don't find 16. So we don't increase our temporary length. We check whether our temporary length is greater than our maximum length. So no. So we do not change these values. We check for 3. 3 is false. We check for 12. It is false. We check for 2. It is also false. So we get maximum starting point as 8 and maximum length as 5. Now after this, we have completed this. So what after this, we just print, right? So let's take this there and print as well. So this we just have to print. So okay, so we have our maximum starting point as well as our maximum length. So now we start a for loop again until our maximum length, and we keep on increasing our I, and we start printing our ms. Please press I. First of all, I is 0. Then we print 8 plus 1. Then we print 8 plus 2, 8 plus 3, and 8 plus 4. So we get this as our longest consecutive sequence, and that is our expected answer. So I hope you understood this question. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you liked it. I'll see you in the next question.